So I thought I would start, I don't want to talk for too long, but I did want to give you a fairly comprehensive idea of who I am and what I do. So I thought I would start very quickly with just an introduction to my work before we get to this particular project. So I'm a weaver. I hand dye and hand weave woven artworks, non-functional artworks. So I'm very interested in craftsmanship, and I've been working, I went to Central St Martin's and the Royal College of Art, and I graduated in 1997. So I've been running an art studio, my own art studio since then. And here are just some examples of I've done a lot of corporate commissions, a lot of public art, a lot of private commissions. I've done a lot of work with the NHS, and I'll talk a bit about that. So primarily I'm a weaver, and I make these wall-based artworks. They're very abstract, they're very colourful. But in recent years, I've also been painting. So here are a few examples of this relationship between sort of painting and weaving. I was very lucky to do a commission for the Tate Modern 2 years ago, and this is in place at the Tate Modern for 4 years. It's the first time they've ever commissioned a piece of textiles, which is very exciting. So it's rather sort of groundbreaking in a way that, you know, the art world is starting to sort of really appreciate craftsmanship and textiles in a new way, which I think is quite interesting. I think one of the reasons why I was put forward for this project is that I have done quite a lot of sort of architectural public work, which I thought you would find interesting. This is a project I did in, I think, 2012 with Johnson Tiles. So even though I'm a weaver and a painter, I actually work across many different sort of materials and mediums. And again, I think that's why Catherine sort of put me forward for this project. She felt that I could really bring some of that knowledge about bigger, more architectural projects, you know, into the process. So this is a project I did very closely with Johnson Tiles, and it was for a design festival. And it was basically showing, I think it was something like, I don't know, 20,000 tiles or something crazy. So, so really, I'm very interested in this sort of idea of grids and color and architectural sort of language. This is a project I did for St Thomas's Hospital in London. So I'm used to working with groups and, you know, public sort of areas. This was to reclad the facade of St Thomas's Hospital, and I've done a few projects like this. This is a project I did 2 years ago with Bristol Royal Infirmary. This is the sanctuary space at Bristol Royal Infirmary. And so it was really working very closely with the users of the hospital, and also the staff, and also people who visit the hospital, and trying to create a very nice sanctuary space that was accessible and open to all. So again, these are all just examples of sort of the background knowledge I have. This is a project I did in Archway, again, a sort of public planning space project where it was a very old 60s building, and they wanted to sort of regenerate it and give it a bit of life, very cheaply, I might add. So there were very limited sort of materials and ideas and time. And this was the project I came up with. I also worked on a church project that was completed in 2018. This is St Peter's Church in Battersea. So this is 5,000 square meters of digitally printed glass. Again, using sort of abstract language, St Peter's, they actually wanted it to sort of reference fish scales and the sea. So again, there was a sort of very abstract brief, but they just wanted it to be sort of somehow linked to the name of the church. And also it was sort of to use the windows as a sort of functional, obviously referencing stained glass, but also trying to give the building identity. This is a very large project I did in Nottinghamshire. This was actually started in 2004. It took about 10 years to happen. It's King's Mill Hospital in Mansfield. And it was putting colour on the facade of the building, using powder-coated metal, transparent glass, film, all kinds of different materials. And again, really trying to use colour and use my knowledge as a sort of as a lead artist to try and give the building a sense of place and a sense of identity. And again, I thought, you know, it'd be interesting for you to see that. So it's really just a gallop through some of these previous projects. Now, alongside that, I've also been doing a personal project. I live in Sussex. I love Sussex. I grew up in Sussex. And I've been working on a project which I've been calling sort of Sussex Odyssey. This has been going on for about 5 years. So really using my woven work and photography and referencing the landscape and really thinking about this abstract, you know, rather than literally capturing a landscape, using a sort of abstract language to really capture the feeling of a landscape rather than, you know, literally how it looks, and sort of reproducing a sort of traditional landscape painting. So really this is work about sort of traveling around Sussex, painting out in the open, and really trying to capture more how I feel about the place than, you know, specifically how the place looks, and really colour. They're really about colour. So in a funny way, when this brief came through from Catherine Thomas, it was so exciting in so many different ways, because I had already been sort of under my own steam working on a project that was very much about Sussex as a place, and also this idea of taking a sort of abstract language and making it sort of more accessible. So that's just a very quick gallop. By all means, you know, I can show you more of my previous work if you're curious, but really I'm going to start talking more about the actual presentation that I did for this project. So this was my initial, so after talking to Catherine and being brought on board, I went to Brighton several times, and I did some paintings sort of in situ, inspired by the place. And again, sort of using a color palette. You know, it was quite a difficult project, this one, because there was a very limited color palette available, and really that wasn't anything I had control over. That was very much to do with the budget, and very much to do with the type of glazed brick that had been chosen for this project. It just comes in a very limited number of colors. So it was a little bit sort of, it was sort of working backwards and forwards, if that makes sense. So really being aware that the color palette was limited. And really the brief I was given was really to sort of, to bring nature into the site. I mean, obviously, when I went and visited the site, you know, it's a very, very urban setting, which is immediately apparent. And, you know, the brief I was given was very much to sort of, to look at the site and obviously acknowledge the surrounding green areas of Brighton. Because as I understand it, the intention, you know, I went to Longley Place, and actually I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, even though the actual site of the building is kind of very urban and quite gritty, I actually found the recent development there very, very pleasing. I really enjoyed it, and the planting I thought was really interesting and quite exciting. So I really tried to reference some of the colours that I was seeing there through photography. And I also did a bit of painting, you know, up on the downs, and really sort of trying, I suppose, to bring the surrounding area into that space, but also look at the immediate area. And, you know, I was lucky in that, you know, the weather was pretty fantastic on the days. I don't know how common that is, but the days I was in Brighton, it was really, really fantastic and very exciting, actually. So it was really nice to sort of spend some days there and stay with friends there, and just sort of walk around and just try and, you know, just try and really look and get a feeling for the architecture. I mean, hopefully those previous slides I showed you, you know, I love architecture, and I'm very, very interested. I mean, I'm an artist and a painter, but I'm also very, very interested in buildings and how they relate to their environments. You know, I do love color, and I like to put color on buildings. And I've probably done about 20 projects where I'm bringing color into and onto architectural buildings. Some are pre-existing, some are new. So it's really something that's quite close to my heart. And I really found that, you know, and I love color. And really, I think this project is, you know, it's about architecture, and it's really about using color I hope, I mean, I hope you agree, we can talk about that at the end, you know, using color in a sort of intelligent way. I'm very interested in color theory. I'm very interested in the value and saturation of color, and really trying to use color in a meaningful way. So instead of sort of randomly putting color all over the facade, or all over, you know, in this case, around the artwork, actually really trying to ground it in some sort of logic and meaning and sort of intelligent theory. So it was really nice just to do these paintings and really look at the colors that I saw around me. Of course, you know, it was very interesting to go and see the site itself. You know, I'm sort of used to that because I've done a few projects that, you know, have taken many, many years. I mean, the church project I showed you, I think I started working on that 15 years ago. So it is quite strange, you know, when a building doesn't really exist and you have to sort of go and visualize, you know, how you might respond. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And I think one of the reasons why, you know, why I was put forward and why hopefully I was selected was that I sort of have a little bit of experience of sort of imagining how a project like this is really going to come to fruition. And there's always an element of the unknown. I mean, you never quite know until the final result, but you've really got to try and use your best judgment and your best intelligence to really try and do something that you feel is going to work well. So I really, you know, I just really enjoyed this part of the process. So Catherine really encouraged me to start with these sort of big abstract paintings, and really, and actually I've sort of included them as part of the package. I mean, it wasn't really asked of me, but I really felt that this series of paintings are actually available to you. They're about 1 meter by 60 centimeters each, and I believe there's 6 of them. And they're watercolor, they're liquid watercolor and acrylic gouache on this very lovely watercolor paper. So I'm really trying to sort of capture a bit of energy and a bit of feeling of the place. You know, I'm not trying to represent, you know, the sea of Brighton, but I would hope that in my approach, you know, that sort of almost unconsciously these motifs come through, you know, of shoreline and sky and landscape, but also this sort of weaving is all about warp and weft, so vertical, horizontal. And really all of these paintings have this sort of, even though they're very organic, they do also have a sort of architectural underpinning. And I always feel like they feel like sort of portals or windows or thresholds. And they are sort of very landscapey, I feel, without being, you know, literally landscapes. Oh,
another place in Winchester Street, and you can have it back in the morning. Just she's got to pay.
Oh, I don't, is someone talking? Are you talking to me? No. Okay, I'll just carry on. So so this is really the palette of these glazed bricks, and what I thought was really lovely is that they're physically, you know, they're not just stuck on the facade, they're actually what the facade is built from, you know, and I think that's a really nice aspect of this project. They're not tiles, they're actually 3-dimensional glazed bricks, which I think is a really nice aspect. And they're really sort of proper, rather old-fashioned, sort of glossy glazed bricks. And actually the color is, there's a lot of movement in the color in these bricks. And so I was sent an entire range of the bricks. So I really looked at them a lot while I was designing the project. And one of the things I really like to think about is the sort of the orientation of the building. So in terms of north, south, east, west, you know, southern light is a warm light, northern light tends to be a cooler light, and then east and west is a little bit in between. And I think it's really nice sometimes to use this sort of geographic orientation of a building. So in a nutshell, the simplified version is if you put those warmer colors on that southern facing edge, that they will really glow, you know, when the southern light hits it. And then if you put cooler colors like blue and green on that north edge, they will respond better to that northern light, which is just slightly cooler. I mean, it's subtle, but I think it's quite a nice way of sort of grounding the building somehow. So instead of sort of saying, oh, let's just randomly put color all over the place, let's really just think. And also wayfinding, you know, it's a big building, it's got several entrances. So I was very keen right from the beginning to try and sort of think about not just make the artwork beautiful, but also have it be meaningful and functional and help with wayfinding. And also there was a lot of concern about this sort of translation of this woven language. So weaving is very linear, very straight lined, but there seemed to be a feeling from Catherine and from other people involved early on that this gesture, you know, the gesture of the paintings was actually quite exciting. So the challenge, and this is where I think I'm quite unique, is that because I work with warp and weft and I've done projects with tiles before, the challenge was really to try and get a sense of movement and an animation, I think is a good word. You know, buildings are very static things and facades can be very, very static. And I think the challenge here is to really give that very large area a sense of sort of movement and animation. I think that for me is the challenge. So here are the tiles. I sort of created a reference scheme. Another one of the issues was, do we lay the bricks, you know, horizontally, or do we lay them vertically? So I did a couple of little tests here just to sort of see, you know, which one felt right. In the end, there was quite a big cost implication about doing them vertically. As I said earlier, these are really integral building blocks of the building. So in fact, to make them run vertically was really way too complicated and not really in keeping with the function of the building. So in the end, it was very much the only option to run horizontally. So my challenge was to keep this sense of flow going through this sort of horizontal formation. So we did a couple of, I did a couple of sort of samples of sort of looking at the painting, then translating it into the tile, and then how would that read on the actual facade. There were a few different options. You know, what this one, for example, was a very, very more minimal approach. So really much more about just gradating color. So really no gesture at all. And I think it was felt that was, yeah, could be quite pretty and quite interesting, but just not very dynamic. So then we started looking at ways of sort of taking those 6 paintings that I'd made and actually how could we place them. I mean, these apertures, for want of a better word, you know, they're enormous. I mean, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, it's covering sort of 8 floors of the building. So it's really it's very deceptive when we're looking at these plan drawings. You know, it sort of looks very sort of small, but of course they're absolutely enormous spaces. So part of the challenge is to really think about how that gesture and how the color, you know, and I think some of these earlier designs were a little bit too complicated. So that as things went on, this seemed to be a favoured design, and this idea of almost making these apertures themselves feel like windows, you know, within the facade of the building. So by having the paintings sort of continue across these, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 sort of apertures, it almost gives this visual sort of transparency almost, and gives a sense of a sort of portal. So these are the 2 sort of identified areas. And then this was a very early visual of a sort of slightly pixelated version of bearing in mind, we always knew this was going to be manifested in tile. If there were other choices, you know, it could have maybe been a giant painting. But again, that's very different cost implications. So I think with a project like this, it's very hard to get that balancing act, you know, between the budget, you know, the reality of what the budget allows, the scale of it, you know, it's really an enormous space. And also just the viability of what's actually really possible. So but at the same time, you don't want to compromise, you know, and you want to try and do something exciting, and you want to do something meaningful and dynamic and animated. So it's always a bit of a juggling act, trying to sort of do the best that you can within the constraints, but not to compromise too much. So, I mean, I tried very, very hard to try and, I hope, you know, find that balance within the restriction of, you know, what was available, the technique and the materials available. So this is really the final, so this idea of wayfinding. So again, just really thinking about the blue entrance, you know, there's this green entrance, this idea of this very hot yellow color appearing in the southern edge of the building. These are the colonnades. So I think you're probably aware that there, on the ground floor, there are these sort of colonnades that sort of, for want of a better word, that run all the way around the building. So it was really nice. The architects got me to look at this as well. So this is almost an additional part of the project. There are the two artworks, and then there's this tying in. So making sure there's coherence and sort of continuity, you know, within the color. And so everything kind of feels that it's been considered. So, I mean, this is a slightly rough drawing, but hopefully it just gives you an idea. So again, this is that blue corner. And then as you move around the building, you get and this is the same material, by the way, the same glazed bricks. I mean, they look quite flat here in this illustration, but I think in reality, they'll be really beautiful, and they'll just link what's happening on the ground level, because of course, this is what most people are going to see. People will glance up, I hope, and obviously when people are driving over that sort of bypass, you know, I think they will see the artwork, but also a lot of people will just arrive at the building and not really look up. So I think it was important to have some sort of element linking this very big building at ground level with also what was happening above. So this is really the final artwork, and it was really challenging. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was thousands of bricks, which I had to hand position. I mean, it was a really epic project, I have to say. I mean, it took really days and days and days of, and everything had to have a number code on it, because of course there's no point in just making a pretty picture. And then you have to also, not only do I have to make an artwork, but I also have to communicate what we're doing to the bricklayers, you know, the guys that are actually going to be installing this. So there's really a very technical element at play here as well. There's no point in sort of allocating all these nice colors and then sifting through and trying to figure out what color goes where. So what my solution to that was to use this numbered system right from the beginning, so that we always knew exactly to the very brick, you know, which color was going where. And of course, with a project like this, you know, you do have to be very, very specific. You can't really leave anything up to the people installing it. You have to be very, very prescriptive. And again, the sort of balancing act of sort of keeping a bit of energy and a bit of life in the project, but also being, you know, very specific about the placement of these bricks. So one thing I was quite happy with was this sort of, I do feel there is a sense of sort of flow and movement. I think it does feel sort of organic and natural. And I think, or I hope, that when people walk around this building and they see this artwork, that whether they know, whether they've read on the website or whether they've seen any of the preliminary ideas, you know, that they still feel some sense of something, you know, that they can relate to this in some way. And certainly, you know, the architects, and, you know, when I was presenting these ideas, there did seem to be this feeling that even if you didn't know what this was inspired by, that it does have a feeling of sea and landscape and air and nature. And that was really what my brief was. So I really tried very hard to stick to that. And obviously the good thing about something that is abstract like this is that it is open to interpretation. And I often feel that, you know, color is a very emotional thing. And, you know, even if people don't maybe know the concept behind something, they can respond in a purely sort of emotional way, I think. And as I said earlier on, these glazed bricks, they're really beautiful. I mean, the color is really stunning and very deep, and they're very sort of, they're like those very old-fashioned sort of glazed Victorian tiles. I mean, they've got that kind of lovely depth to them. And I really hope, I mean, we're looking at a flat thing on a flat screen, you know, with numbers on it. So I can see that it might be hard to really visualize how this is going to look. But I really think once we're looking at this with these beautiful glazed bricks, you know, they're very three-dimensional and they've got real depth. So I think it will just, I hope, be even better and richer. The color is going to be very rich. So this is really that main section that you're going to see as you're sort of driving through that road. And it's really got a lot of movement and a lot of flow, I feel. And obviously there's quite a lot of plain brickwork around this piece. So I really tried to think about how that was going to relate to this. And again, if we look here, I mean, on this drawing, those apertures, if you look on the ground floor, I mean, on this drawing, they're all turquoise, but they will actually gradate in the same material, which I think will be a really lovely sort of detail. And then this is on that other lower corner of the building. And again, I hope it will really bring a bit of life to that street. And also I think lighting, I mean, I've said this a few times to the architects. I mean, I don't know what provision is being made for lighting, but I really feel that, you know, lighting will, I think, will have a huge impact on this project. And I think it should be, if it can be, it should be lit in some way. So that's, whoops, that's the last slide. So just going back between these two, I just think just a little bit of, especially at night, obviously, especially in the winter, you know, a little bit of lighting somehow. I mean, obviously these tiles, they're very reflective, so you can't shine very bright light on it because you'll just get it reflected back. But if there's some way of ambient lighting some of these sections, I think it could be really stunning, and it could be a real beacon, you know, leading people sort of to the entrances of the building. And that's it. I mean, I've sort of galloped a bit through that, so I'm aware that there may well be some questions, or you may want me to go back to something. I'm just putting your faces back on here so I can see you all. So yes, that's in a nutshell. I didn't want to talk for too long, but maybe that wasn't long enough.
No, that was great. That was great. I think I probably should have said right at the beginning that the brief was for those particular elevations and the colonnade, and it was brickwork, wasn't it? I should sort of just said that simple thing right at the beginning. But just while people are thinking whether they want to say anything, my comment is there's some parts of that area where the brickwork, not your bit, but things that have previously happened, where the brickwork really lets it down. There's no creativity, there's no variation, there's no colour, and it's such a pity. But so I'm very enthusiastic about this, thinking about the brickwork and putting so much creativity into it, and your own personal enthusiasm. So I'm really positive about that. And I think, just to emphasise what you said, on the view that's on the screen at the moment, that's actually a huge part of the structure, isn't it? So as we see it, it's next to a New England house, and you've got that huge panel that people will see as they're walking past. But then at ground level, there's the colonnades. So if people aren't looking up, they can see the same sort of thought pattern in the colours at the level that they're walking. So that's my comments. Anybody like to comment or ask any questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of hands up.
Right, sorry, okay. Yeah. Right. Lucy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really like your designs. I think they're really good. They really sort of lift the building. It gives it that sort of sense of airiness, which you know, a giant block often lacks. I just wanted to ask, the colonnades, are they going to be solid colour, or are you kind of?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I'm not saying this is an excuse, but I think really it's budget. I mean, I asked straight away, I said, you know, could there be a color gradation, you know, within each of those colonnades? And the answer is yes, there could have been, but it's really, it costs more, you know, it takes longer to install, you know, all of those sort of practical constraints. So as far as I'm aware, they are one color, but each one will be a different color, if that makes sense. So there will be a sense of gradation. So when you're looking down that lower edge, you will get a feeling that it's animated and that something's happening there. Hopefully enough to make you want to look up, hopefully. I mean, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? If someone sort of thinks, oh, actually, there's something happening here. And then it sort of makes them pause for a moment and look up potentially. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think with all these things, it's it comes down to sort of money and budget. And I guess, you know, if there was more budget and more time, you know, perhaps there could have been other areas on the building where there could have been more intervention. I mean, that's something that you know, I obviously I had no say in it and no control over, so it's not something I can comment on too easily. But I hope that within the areas I've been given and within the brief I've been given, I tried my best, you know, to bring as much to it as I can. But yes, of course, there's always, in retrospect, there's always places where you think, oh, if only we'd been able to do this and that. But, you know, hopefully we can focus on the positive and, you know, and what is there and what is going to be visible. So I'm glad you like it. I mean, it's a really tricky project, I have to say, because there are lots of constraints, and there's only so much you can do with a grid, you know.
Yeah, I think that's where your weaving intuition comes in, because the weaving is a grid. Judy wanted to ask something.
Yes, first of all, I think the large panels with the gradations is absolutely beautiful. I think it will change the area. So thank you for that. I was also going to ask about the colonnades. I don't mean to sound rude, but for instance, where you've got a solid colonnade and you're going to have, say, the green tiles all the same colour, I'm afraid they remind me of old-fashioned Victorian toilets.
Right, okay.
So that kind of worries me. I mean, if they were all colours that maybe the Victorians didn't use for those sort of purposes, but I just think the colonnades to me are very important because they're surrounding the shops. And
yeah, I mean,
you want to welcome people in.
Yeah, I mean, I think
all those greens, I immediately thought, oh, I remember Victorian toilets looking like that, public ones.
I mean, the problem is that colour is such a personal thing, and everybody has a relationship with particular colours, and you can show the same colour. You know, Joseph Albers, he's a colour theorist. You know, he was a Bauhaus guy, and he showed 100 people, he asked 100 people to choose red, primary red, and he ended up with 100 different shades of red, because everybody sees what I see as primary red. You know, one of you is going to see as orange, you know, and you see as pink, you know. So part of the problem is, and that's what's so interesting about colour, is that it's a very emotional subject. And I remember when I did the Mansfield Hospital project, there was this shade of turquoise that I chose. It was actually on another building. And the planning officer, he hated it. I mean, he absolutely hated it. And he kept raking me over the coals about this turquoise. And I just said to him, you know, I'm so sorry. I don't know why, you know, the idea is that it's, you know, anyway, we had this long discussion. And then finally, right at the end, he said, oh God, he said, when I was a child, I had this, you know, this toy truck, you know, that was that color. And it just, and then he launched into this amazing story, and he suddenly realized that color for him was really powerful, you know, and it had nothing to do with the project. It was a very personal sort of memory that he had. So, I mean, I take it on board. I mean, all I can say is that there are many colors on the colonnades, and if one of them reminds you of a Victorian toilet, I'm very sorry about that, but maybe there's another color, you know, which doesn't remind you of that, you know. And
I'll go in the yellow door, it's okay.
You know, I mean, all I tried, as I said again, you know, I mean, if you saw the color palette that was available, I mean, I really did the best I possibly could with a very limited. I mean, there were some really awful browns and sort of sludgy grays and, you know, beiges, and for me, I tried really hard to sort of push it in a direction. So at least, I mean, I love this green. It's actually quite a fresh green. It's quite acidic. It's quite an acid green, and it's quite fresh. I mean, for me, it's quite a contemporary color. So of course, you know, it's very, very hard to find something that everybody's pleased with. But I hope the scale of them, and again, these are very, very high columns. I mean, and I hope that if you stand obliquely and you get this little rush of all the different tones, you know, I hope it will be a pleasant experience. But I'm sorry.
I see. So you've got like a dark green, and then so although the columns, each column will be one color, they won't all be the same green. They'll be all shades.
No, that's what you're looking at here. So this is that. Oh, and there's another slide. So that is well, it says the corner of Elder Place and New England Street. And
Yeah.
this is Elder Place, this is that one that kind of connects there. So this is actually a very dark blue. I know it looks black on my screen.
Oh, right.
It's actually
Okay.
a very dark blue. And then it's going through this lovely electric blue, and then it's going into this lovely sort of sea blue.
Sea blue.
And it's like a sort of almost an aqua green, and then there's that limey green, and then there's like almost a grassy green, and then there's like a sort of foresty green, and then there's one tile which is actually sort of metallic. It's like a sort of metallic bronze, actually. It's a bronze color. It's actually really beautiful, and then coming with a couple of sort of yellows at the end.
Yellows, yeah.
I mean,
Okay, well, yeah, that does look nice. I have one other question. You say you visited the area.
Yeah.
Presumably you are aware of the graffiti and tagging that is smothering the road.
Yeah, I mean, I did.
These tiles, is it going to be, are they able to have stuff like that cleaned off?
I have no idea. I mean, it's not really my department. I think I would assume, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean,
Ptolemy, do you have access to the architect to ask that sort of question? Because
I mean, I do, but you're better off asking them directly. I mean,
our problem is that we get very little contact with the architect.
Right.
It's been our headache. We don't seem to be able to get through to Longley, except with extreme difficulty.
Right.
If you could be a go-between for us, that would be ever so kind of you, and we'd really appreciate it.
I mean, I think all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's really sort of maintenance question, I suppose, about who's going to be looking out for this and making sure that it's, you know, maintained. And again, lighting could have a lot to do with that, I think. If the building is well lit at ground level, one would hope, I mean, you can't guarantee it, but one would hope that that will deter that kind of thing. But who knows? I don't know. I mean, yes, of course, I noticed particularly that lower road, you know, that it
Elder Place.
Yeah, and you know, and
terrific.
And that's part of, you know, that's obviously part of what that area is about, and what you're trying to change in some ways. So exactly. I think it's I mean, the only thing I would hope is that, you know, that this, when someone feels like, I mean, I can't speak for a graffiti artist, but, you know, if that graffiti artist takes a moment, you know, to think that maybe actually another artist, you know, did something, you know, that maybe that would just for a moment make them hesitate before they deface it. But obviously some people don't care, so they're going to do it anyway.
I think one of the things is sort of active frontage, that if people are in the building and it's being used and inhabited and cared, and it looks as though there are people who care,
of course.
then it doesn't itself deter. And I think there's a sort of accumulation of that as the developments go on. Curtis, my dear friend Curtis, how nice to see you.
Can I just say, can I just apologise? I came on very late with difficulty. Sorry, Ptolemy. It was my noise in the background, and Philip rightly muted me immediately because I realised that this is one great film that we don't often have the privilege of having, and I've gone and spoilt it. So my apologies. Perhaps we can edit that bit out. I think that's interesting because I was thinking about the you know, how it might weather, you know, age, what have you, and also thinking about, I mean, this is possibly quite a good social experiment, because back in 1982, Wilson and Kelling came up with a theory. It's called the broken window theory, and you might be aware of it. Mayor Giuliani in New York, it's the idea.
Tipping point, Malcolm Gladwell.
That's right, Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point. So possibly this could be a very good social experiment, because is there any reason why people shouldn't respect this? And it would be interesting to see whether this actually might just conquer a graffiti problem in the area, that it actually changes the way that people respect their area and their community. I think it's wonderful. And the other comment I'd make is, you don't fancy doing a bit to the building next door, do you? New England House. Lots of spaces on there that could get coloured.
No, I mean, as I said, I've done a few projects. You might have missed it at the beginning. I've done a few.
Sorry, I came in a bit late.
A few recladding projects, you know, and it's a real challenge actually when you've got a big old 60s building, and you know, recladding, although it's controversial after Grenfell, but in theory it is a way of you know, reinvigorating an existing building, you know, relatively cheaply. And color is a great way of doing that. I mean, I'm not saying you should put color on every building everywhere, but certain buildings really benefit from it. And what I love about this project is that this is going to be rented apartments. I mean, hallelujah, you know, thank God. You know, I just think it's brilliant. I love that it's not buy to let and that it's a rented building. And I mean, you know, I just love the idea that you know, a big rented building could also be a thing of beauty, more like they treat in Europe, you know, in Central Europe, you know, in European continent. You know, most people don't own their apartments and they live in communal buildings. So I think that's I think that's really exciting. But yeah, I mean, I guess we'll just have to see. And again, I think lighting will help with how people also, by the way, the big paintings, I mean, I'm offering them to the client, you know, and the idea is that they could be framed and hung, you know, in the entrance hall of the actual original paintings. So I think that could also be quite a nice sort of gesture, you know. So if anyone was interested and wanted to sort of see the inspiration, that they could then sort of, you know, look inside the lobby.
I think that's a great idea. I don't know how public the lobby will be. I think there's a worker space going on down there, but I think that would be brilliant. You may or may not know, Ptolemy, that there's a poem.
Yes,
and it would be really nice if the poem was in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that there's sort of permanent visual and verbal marker put down there. Yeah. Kurt, were you going to say something else?
So yeah, I was just thinking, actually, I don't know what the rights are to your paintings or from Longley, but it might be nice to have like vinyl banners in London Road for a time hanging down.
Yeah, I think what I'm hoping is that there's a lot of information here, and there's a body of work. I mean, it's not just about the tiles themselves. I think there's a story around it, there's some artwork around it, and I think it has been discussed, you know, that you sort of have a sense of, I mean, I own the copyright technically, but there's no reason why those images can't be reproduced in some way, you know, and we can certainly discuss that later on. I mean, they're not going to be used for anything else. So it's, you know, and it was my idea really to donate those original paintings as well, just because I felt that was a, you know, a nice sort of gesture. But yeah, I think there's no reason why if we just go back, you know, why the actual paintings themselves, you know, and there's definitely a color palette here, and there's definitely a sort of, I mean, I know that horrible thing about branding, you know, but there is a sort of, there's a consistency here, I think, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
And they all have names. They're all named around Brighton. I mean, around, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I gave them all names that sort of connected to Brighton somehow. But
Ptolemy, that's great, and thank you for that generous idea of donating those pictures as part of it. I think that would be really, really lovely. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to sort of prolong, but just to say thank you so much for presenting, and thank you too for the enthusiasm and creativity with which you've responded to this brief.
Yeah.